All right, get ready to dive deep, folks, because today we're taking on the Israeli tour guide licensing exam.
Oh, yeah.
You've got tons of study materials, and it can feel kind of overwhelming, right?
Oh, for sure.
So we're going to dig through all of it together, find the real gems, and hopefully unearth some cool connections along the way.
It's going to be quite the adventure, I think.
Yeah. So, to start off, this thing about the Philistine city of Gad being found at Tel Esafi, that really stood out to me.
Hmm.
It's always Samson and those battles that come to mind, but this discovery, it tells us so much more than just those epic biblical stories, right?
Yeah, absolutely. What's really interesting about this find is it kind of helps us see the Philistines not just as these mystical figures, but as a real civilization,
Mm.
with depth. We're seeing their urban planning, their pottery, even glimpses of their daily life. It's a window into their world. And then to contrast that, we've got the discovery of a Middle Bronze Age gate at Ashkelon, another major Philistine city. And this tells us that, well, even within Philistine society, there were different eras, architectural styles, a whole evolution we're piecing together.
It really makes you wonder, like, what else is still hidden down there,
Yeah,
just waiting to be found?
exactly.
And speaking of layers, there's this thing about the Seleucid Acra fortress in Jerusalem. It's making me think of the Maccabees and their revolt.
Oh, yeah, of course.
It's all coming back to me.
The Akra, you see, was a powerful symbol of oppression for the Jewish people, especially under the Seleucids. Imagine this massive fortress looming over the Temple Mount, a constant reminder of foreign rule. But then we jump ahead a few centuries and we see remnants of Herod the Great's building projects in Scythopolis, which is present-day Beit Shean. Herod, he was a master builder combining Roman styles with local traditions, and his influence is visible across the land.
So from those imposing fortresses to like these grand building projects, we're seeing how empires rose and fell, and it's all reflected in the actual stones of Israel.
Right.
It's like every layer tells a story.
It does. And sometimes those stories, well, they get rewritten as new discoveries challenge the old assumptions. Take the Lachish letters, for example. These pottery shards with writing on them, they give us a peek into life in ancient Judah just before the Babylonian conquest. But here's the thing. They've started this whole debate about the size and power of the United Monarchy, the time of David and Solomon. Some scholars think these letters suggest a smaller, less centralized kingdom than the one described in the Bible.
Wow. So it's like a historical detective story where these ancient letters are the clues to a bigger mystery.
Exactly.
Okay, this next one really sparked my interest. The Sapir site.
Okay.
And it's linked to the National Water Carrier Project somehow.
Right.
That seems like a giant leap from ancient history to modern infrastructure.
I see what you mean.
What's the connection?
Well, the Sapir site is in the Judean desert, which is known for its flash floods. You might be thinking, floods in a desert? How's that possible?
It doesn't seem right.
Well, it's because of the geology. The desert floor is mostly chalk, and chalk doesn't absorb water well.
Mm.
So when rain does come, it just rushes across the surface, creating these sudden, powerful torrents.
Ah, okay. So the ancient Israelites had to deal with these flash floods, and then thousands of years later, modern engineers had to figure out how to work around them when building this huge water system, right?
Yeah.
To move water from the Sea of Galilee all the way to the drier parts of the country. That's wild.
Really shows the lasting effect of geography, doesn't
It
it?
does.
Whether you're building an ancient settlement or a modern water pipeline, you've got to work with or sometimes against the forces of nature.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, we've tackled ancient cities, even a little geology. Now let's dive into religion and culture,
Ooh, yes.
which seems like a whole other layer cake to unpack here.
And a delicious one at that, full of surprises.
Okay, so what's the first surprise?
Did you know the Jewish holiday of Shavuot and the Christian holiday of Pentecost are actually connected?
Wait, really?
Yeah. Both happen 50 days after Passover and Easter, respectively. Shavuot celebrates receiving the Torah on Mount Sinai, while Pentecost marks when the Holy Spirit descended upon the apostles.
Hmm.
It's a cool example of how these two faiths, coming from shared roots, developed distinct but parallel traditions.
So even in their differences, there's a shared rhythm, a shared way of marking time. That's pretty amazing.
It is.
All right, speaking of shared spaces, let's talk about those ancient synagogues. What stands out to you about these Talmudic era synagogue mosaics?
Let me think.
I'm looking through the material here.
Right.
Well, the imagery is fascinating. There's one with Helios, the Greek sun god. You wouldn't think you'd see a pagan deity in a Jewish place of worship.
That's true. It reminds us that cultures don't exist in vacuums. Back in the Talmudic period, there was a lot of interaction between the Jewish community and the Greco-Roman world. We're seeing that blend of traditions, that cultural exchange reflected in their art and architecture. But then as we moved into the Byzantine period, there's a shift. The synagogue at El Kanatir, for example, it's got these amazing mosaics, but they show scenes from the Bible, a definite emphasis on Jewish identity and their own stories.
It's almost like we're seeing a visual representation of how Jewish identity evolved in the land of Israel, starting from this time of mixing and then moving towards a clearer expression of their traditions.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And that evolution continues as we go from synagogues to mosques. Your notes mentioned the minbar,
Oh, right, the minbar.
that's the pulpit in a mosque. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's where the imam delivers sermons during Friday prayers. It's often this beautiful, ornate, raised platform. It's clearly an important focal point.
It is, and it reminds us that Islam, just like Judaism and Christianity, has its own rich history and traditions. And speaking of Islamic history, you found some information about the Battle of Karbala in Iraq, which eventually led to the split between Shia and Sunni Muslims.
Yeah, that battle was incredibly important. It led to the martyrdom of Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad.
Mm.
And the division that emerged from that event, well, it's still shaping the political and religious landscape of the Middle East today.
It's a reminder that historical events, even ones from centuries ago, can have a lasting impact. Their effects can echo across generations.
Okay, before we move on, there's a note here about the Samaritans and their belief about where the binding of Isaac took place. It's different from mainstream Jewish tradition, right?
That's right. While Jewish tradition places the binding on Mount Moriah in Jerusalem, the Samaritans believe it happened on Mount Gerizim, which is near Nablus in the West Bank. It really highlights the different ways religious texts can be interpreted and the strong connection people feel to specific places.
It seems like every corner of this land holds layers of religious significance, each one telling a different story, a different perspective on faith and history. It makes you wonder what other hidden connections are out there, just waiting for us to uncover them.
Who knows what we'll find?
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and check out the land itself. I'm ready to explore the geography, the natural side of Israel.
Yeah, me too.
It seems like there's a lot to uncover, even beyond those ancient cities and religious sites.
Oh, definitely. The landscape is so diverse, from the snowy peaks of Mount Hermon all the way to the depths of the Dead Sea, lush valleys, deserts.
Wow.
Each region has a unique story, you know.
So where should we begin our exploration?
Let's see.
Well, we were just talking about Akko, so how about we stick around the north for a bit?
Sounds good.
My notes mention the Naaman Stream. It flows near the city.
Right.
I imagine it's played a pretty important role in the history of that area.
Yeah, for sure. The Naaman Stream has been a real lifeline for settlements there for centuries. Water for agriculture, for daily life. Reminds us that even way back then, people were drawn to spots with fresh water.
Right.
And if we follow the stream inland, we get to the hills of the Galilee, where the Berea Fortress is.
Ah, the Berea Fortress. Another reminder of how strategic that whole region has always been. But how does that connect to modern-day life?
Well, imagine you're at the Berea Fortress, and suddenly you need medical attention.
Oh.
Where do you go? The closest big hospital is Ziv Medical Center in Safed, which is miles away.
Wow.
Really highlights how those old settlements and the paths between them, well, they often shaped where modern stuff is built, even healthcare.
It's like those ancient roads and those settlements, they're still influencing the landscape, even as new towns and cities spring up. It's all connected.
That's right.
Okay, let's head south a bit. I'm seeing something about the Beit Hakkerem Valley. It's known for its vineyards, right?
Oh, yes, definitely. The Beit Hakkerem Valley, beautiful area, rolling hills, and of course, amazing wine. But there's also this fascinating group of plants there called Bata and Grega.
Bata and Grega.
Yeah, very resilient. They're perfectly suited for the Mediterranean climate. Tough enough to survive those hot, dry summers and then those mild, wet winters.
So it's not just the grapes then. There's a whole ecosystem happening there, shaped by the land and the weather. Now, on a slightly sadder note, I see that the leopard went extinct in Israel in the 20th century.
Yeah.
But there's mention of vultures being pretty common.
Right. It's an interesting ecological change. Vultures might not be the prettiest birds, but they're crucial for keeping the ecosystem balanced. They're nature's cleanup crew, feeding on carrion, preventing diseases from spreading. The fact that they're thriving means their prey base is healthy too, which is a good sign overall.
It's a reminder that even when something is lost, nature finds a way to adapt and find a new equilibrium. Okay, this next one caught my eye. It's about the Rujum al-Hiri on the Golan Heights and a Bronze Age temple at Tel Megiddo. What links these two places that seem so different?
Well, at first glance, they seem worlds apart, right?
Yeah.
Ruj al Hiri, people call it Golan Stonehenge sometimes, massive complex of stone circles. And then you have Tel Megiddo, this mound with layers of ancient cities, including that Bronze Age temple. But what connects them is they both have these circular structures, hints at some kind of shared ancient beliefs, maybe astronomical, maybe ritual, points to a cultural connection across time and space.
So even though these sites are miles apart and built thousands of years apart, their design might share a common thread, like some ancient understanding about the cosmos or the sacred.
Yeah. It's like a hidden language waiting for us to decode it. And speaking of hidden languages, sometimes they show up in surprising places, like borders, for example. The border between Israel and Egypt today, well, that was originally set by Great Britain and the Ottoman Empire back in the colonial period.
And now that border intersects with all the complexities of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, right? I see a note about Tulkarm.
Right.
It's a Palestinian city, and it's beyond the Green Line, which is that armistice line from 1948.
Exactly. Highlights the ongoing challenges of figuring out borders and making lasting peace in a region with such a long and contested history. But history isn't just about politics and conflict, you know.
Right.
It's also about how we know what we know.
True.
How do archaeologists, historians, how do they figure out how old an artifact is or a site?
Well, that's where carbon-14 dating comes in, right? It's like a time machine for the ancient world.
It is. By looking at how carbon decays in organic material, scientists can get a pretty accurate estimate of how old it is. And that's how we mark the change from prehistory to history, which is, when writing first appeared.
So once people started writing stuff down, we officially entered the historical period. Makes sense. Okay, back to the present day. We have Ramallah, which is the center of the Palestinian Authority. And I also see a note that Arab Israelis make up about 20% of Israel's population today.
Right. It's a real testament to the diversity of Israeli society, such a mix of cultures, religions, languages. And speaking of historical legacies, you mentioned the Ottoman-era Cairo-Damascus route, which had all these khans along it. Have you ever heard of those?
Khans? No. What are that?
Imagine you're a traveler in the 18th century, going along this ancient trade route.
Okay.
Khans were like roadside inns, offering tired travelers a place to rest, get some food, stock up on supplies. They were vital for trade and travel over long distances, kind of like the ancestors of those rest areas we have on highways today.
It's amazing to think about the infrastructure that was in place even centuries ago, how people figured out how to connect and how to travel across such vast distances.
Right.
Speaking of transportation, I noticed something about longitudinal roads in Israel being numbered with odd numbers. Never realized that.
It's one of those little details that can tell you a lot about a place. And since we're talking details, let's head back north to the Galilee, where you'll find Har Bentel. It's a dormant volcano.
Another volcano. Every part of Israel seems to have some volcanic history.
It does. Har Bentel has these stunning views of the surrounding area, including this village nearby called Biram. It was abandoned after the 1948 war, a sad reminder of what conflict costs and the lasting impact of displacement.
It's like those abandoned villages are silent witnesses to history with their stories etched onto the land.
Yeah.
Okay, seeing some scientific terms here. Endemic species and scoria. Can you explain those?
Sure. An endemic species is one that's only found in a specific place, like maybe a certain mountain range or an island. And scoria is a kind of volcanic rock, usually reddish-brown and full of holes. These two ideas might seem totally different, but they can actually come together in fascinating ways. For example, you might find an endemic plant growing on the slopes of a volcano made of scoria, a unique little ecosystem shaped by both biology and geology.
It's amazing how even the tiniest things in nature can reveal these incredible connections. Okay, let's get back to art and culture. I see something about the Bezel Academy of Arts and Design. It recently moved to Mount Scopus in Jerusalem.
Oh yeah, Bezel has been super influential in shaping Israeli art and design since it was founded back in the early 20th century. Moving to Mount Scopus really cements Jerusalem's place as a cultural and intellectual hub in Israel.
And speaking of influential figures from that time, there's Aaron Shalush. He was a key player in the founding and development of Tel Aviv. He had this vision of a modern, lively city on the Mediterranean coast, and his vision Well, it became a reality.
It did.
Okay, another one of those intriguing connections across time periods. We've got Hisham's palace in Jericho, this incredible example of Umayyad architecture. And then there's a prehistoric UNESCO World Heritage Site on Mount Carmel.
Amazing, right? To think of those two places, thousands of years apart, yet relatively close to each other. Hisham's palace, with its intricate mosaics and those luxurious baths, shows us how opulent the Umayyad period was. And the Mount Carmel site, with signs of those very early human settlements, cave dwellings, it takes us way back to the very beginnings of human history.
It's like traveling through time, all within a fairly small area.
It is.
Okay, I see a note about prayer. Apparently, the Amida prayer, which is a central prayer in Judaism, its text was finalized during the Mishnaic period around the 2nd century CE. And now, bringing things back to the present, we've got the red line of the light rail system in Gush Dan, which is the Tel Aviv metro area.
Right. The Red Line connects Bat Yam in the south
Mm.
all the way to Petah Tikva in the east. It's a crucial route for commuters, a real symbol of how connected the region is. And just like that light rail connects different parts of Gush Dan, Israel's Mediterranean ports connect the country to the rest of the world, you know. They're essential for trade and the economy.
It's all about connections, isn't it? Ancient trade routes, modern transport systems, even the links between different points in history. It all seems to be interwoven.
Okay, just a couple more historical bits. Herod the Great, that amazing builder we talked about, his mother was Nabatean.
The Nabateans, they were an ancient Arab people, known for their incredible rock-cut architecture. Petra in Jordan, that's their most famous one. It's fascinating to think about how those cultural influences shaped Herod and how that ultimately affected his building projects in Israel. And then we have the Edomites, who lived in the Shephelah region during the Hellenistic period. The Shephelah, that area between the coast and the Judean mountains, it's always played a key role in the region's history. Okay, I think we've covered a lot of ground. Ancient streams, modern transport, extinct leopards, those resilient plants. We've really explored the incredible diversity of Israel's geography and its natural wonders. But I have a feeling there's still more to come, right?
You're right. We've gone over tons of fascinating stuff, but there's one piece missing, the exam itself. Ready to dive into some specifics about what your listener can expect on the big day?
Okay, let's get down to brass tacks. After all that amazing history exploring the land, our listener needs to know how to actually pass this exam. What's it like?
Okay, well, picture this. It's January 27th, 2025. You're at Binyanei Homa in Jerusalem, and you've got this serious exam in front of you. It's in two parts. Part A is all about the facts, dates, names, events, all that good stuff we've been talking about.
So it's the classic did you memorize everything kind of test?
Kinda. But the amount of information, that's what makes it tough. Think of it as like a mental marathon. Through all those historical periods, all the different religious traditions, all those cultural nuances we've been unpacking, you really need a solid base to do well.
So mental stamina is key for Part A. What about Part B? Does that get a little more hands-on?
Part B, that's where you really need to show you understand the map, where things are. Remember that 1.250,000 scale map of Israel?
Oh yeah, the map.
That's your best friend for this part.
Okay, so it's not just about knowing the facts, but also being able to picture them on a map, right? Like, if I asked you to point out where the Naman Stream flows into the Mediterranean, could you do it?
Yep, that's exactly the kind of thinking you need for Part B. You need to pinpoint spots, understand their significance compared to other places, maybe even plan out a tour route, hypothetically. It's where your tour guide skills really come in.
Starting to sweat just thinking about it. Any tips for conquering this map part of the exam?
Honestly, just study it as much as you can. Get familiar with the different areas, the cities, the mountains, valleys, rivers, all those geographic things. And, of course, know where all those cool historical and archaeological sites are.
So it's like building a map in your mind of the whole country with all those layers of history and geography. Sounds like a lot.
It is. But think of it as like a treasure map. Each location leads to a new discovery, a new story. The better you can see the landscape and how the sites are connected, the more prepared you'll be. It's not just memorizing, it's understanding how things relate to each other.
All right, I'm starting to get it. So what's the passing score? What do you have to get to pass this thing?
60. If you get less than that, you'll have to take the exam again.
60. Got it. No pressure, right? But seriously, what if you're just a couple points short? Any hope for those borderline cases?
There's an appeal process if you're between 55 and 59. So if that happens, don't give up. There's still a chance to explain your situation, and maybe you'll get through.
Okay, so there's a little bit of hope for those who just miss it. But let's aim high from the beginning, right? Go for that 60.
Exactly. And remember, this whole exam, it's just the first step. Passing this part means you can move on to the practical exam, where you actually get to put all this knowledge to work, guiding real tours.
It's like leveling up in a real-life adventure game. Bet the theory, boss, then you're off to prove yourself in the field.
It is. And think about what you get when you win. You get to share the wonders of this incredible land with people from all over the world. You'll be bringing its history, its culture, its natural beauty, all to life with your storytelling.
You know, this whole deep dive has been an incredible journey. Exploring ancient cities, traveling through deserts and valleys, thinking about different religious traditions, even tackling the challenge of this exam. It's clear that being a tour guide in Israel is no easy task. But for anyone who's passionate about this place, who really wants to learn, it's an adventure worth going on.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And to our listener who's about to start this adventure, I'll leave you with this. Remember the power of telling a good story. It's not just about reciting facts. It's about weaving those facts into a narrative that captures people's attention. Find those personal connections, those surprising details, those little things that spark curiosity and wonder. Make those ancient stones come alive. Make those historical figures step out of the past. And make those landscapes share their secrets.
Beautifully put. To our soon-to-be tour guide, we wish you the best of luck on your exam and on all the adventures to come. And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Israeli tour guide licensing exam. We'll see you next time for another exciting exploration.